Magandang araw po sa ating lahat. Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Listening Tambayan. I'm Dayang Iraola, one of the curators of the Listening Biennial 2nd edition. The Tambayan, a gathering of practitioners and audience for collective listening, is under the Listening Biennial 2013. The Listening Biennial is a string of endeavors where listening is in the core of a relational capacity, a philosophical and political proposition, a creative practice, and a research framework, which, although initiated by individuals, scholars, artists, curators, is global in scope. So we are running simultaneously in 21 countries up to today. The first edition was held in 2021, curated by Yang Israel Martinez, Budaditya Chattopadhyay, and its initiator and artistic director Brandon Labelle. The second edition, which started happening in July 6 until now, is curated by Luisa Santos of Portugal, Gili Morato of Bolivia, Raya Badrian of Lebanon, and yours truly from the Philippines. This event is presented by the UP Diliman College of Fine Arts and Parola UP Fine Arts Gallery, co-presented by Alitaptap Artist Community, DZUP, CMC, Department of Broadcast Communication, University Hotel UP Diliman, Multimedia University Faculty of Creative Media in Cyberjaya, Malaysia, Silapacorn University Faculty of Fine Arts in Bangkok, Thailand, Camoes, Instituto da Cooperação e da Língua, Portugal in Tokyo. Sponsored by University of the Philippines, Diliman Office of the Chancellor, UPD, College of Mass Comm, Goethe-Institut, Philippines, Japan Foundation, Manila, supported by Anima Art Space Philippines, BM Lab Philippines, Drawing Room Philippines, and the UP Computer Center. It was a wonderful coincidence that the Bauhaus-Listening.Workshop 2nd edition Sagada, Manila, organized by Bauhaus-Universität Weimar, Deutschlandfunk, Kultur, and the Haus der Kulturen der Welt, coincided with the schedule of the Listening Biennial 2nd edition in Manila, and was also supported by our main patron, the Goethe-Institut Philippines. In the spirit of nurturing ecologies of attention, we offer to you the Bauhaus Listening Workshop, this platform, our Tambayan, to share with our audience an echo of their activities and experiences during the workshop in Sagada earlier this week. It is a very fitting closing to this month-long listening gathering, as we hope that this be a beginning of many more listenings to come. On this note, I pass on the floor to the moderator, UP's very own Professor Emeritus Elizabeth Enriquez, organizing committee led by Nathalie Singer, meLê, Yamomo, Frederike Moormann, and Julian Fuchs. I wish you all a very happy listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maraming salamat, Dayang. And hello, everybody. Magandang araw sa inyong lahat. And I'd like to say that this event is thrilling for me because some of you at least must know that in the Philippines, we celebrated the 100th year of radio last year. So, and when I met Nathalie, I was thrilled to find out that they were also celebrating their 100 years of radio in Germany. So when I looked at the data that we have been gathering in the department, I realized that many countries are actually celebrating 100 years of radio last year and this year. So this whole slew or series of events is very timely and reminds us all that radio, listen, young people, radio is here to stay in spite of social media, the internet and everything. It's just redefining itself. It's evolving, but radio is here to stay. And that's what we have been celebrating in the last week when we went to Sagada to perform a few activities, exercises, performances, discussions, presentations. Actually, as Dayang said, this celebration has been going on for a month, and this is a very fitting close. Is this the close, right? This is the last of the series of activities. So we're very, very happy that you are all with us to to bookend this month-long celebration. Now, I think I'm going to stop here. Those of you who are students of this college, I think I see some faces here that are familiar, who are familiar. You probably got tired of me talking about the 100 years of broadcasting last year, because the entire year we were doing a lot of productions. We actually did about 100 productions last year. Just talking about the different programs that we thought marked the 100 years of radio in the Philippines. By the way, before I turn over the microphone to one of my colleagues here, this year is the 70th year of television in the Philippines, okay? So we're also celebrating that, not with all the fanfare that we tried to achieve last year for radio, but nevertheless, we are celebrating the 70th anniversary of television in the Philippines in the month of October. So there you go. We've been doing this broadcasting for a very long time. So, at this point, I'd like to turn over the microphone to Nathalie Singer, who's going to tell us about the workshop that we had in Sagada in the past 6 days. Nathalie?
Thank you very much, also Dayang, to invite us to share this last week. We had this intense and beautiful week in Sagada together with you today. And maybe a little bit about the context of this Bauhaus listening workshops. Like you just said, the radio is having 100 years all over the planet. Actually, in Germany, we started already 2020. The nice thing about radio is that you can every day make a party about it in 100 years, because there was a lot of steps all over to invent the radio from the first experiment. But 2023, the German first official broadcast started. So this is the anniversary in 23. And in 24 in Europe, so in London, in Paris, and in Germany, the first radio dramas were broadcasted. And this was in the beginning of radio art. And radio art is something which is very known, since in Germany has a very long tradition. And actually, I'm professor for experimental radio and for radio art, teaching this. You are students of mass communication or art. We are doing this in Weimar. And so when 100 years happen, you get a lot of funding and money and the occasion to make beautiful events like this. And the idea was to do listening to the world, 100 years of radio, by not looking like what happened in Europe in the last 100 years or in German radio, but to say what happened in the world, what happened in other parts, in other regions of the world, because radio was all over. Radio was from the beginning in every country. And we saw it this week also, how the colonization also brought telegraphy in. And so we said, okay, let us go making workshops, inviting people who are all dealing with sound, with listening, and with radio, and share together what is the similarity and the differences, and what radio and listening does, and especially how does the media and the radio also shaped our consciousness, our identity in the countries, and our way, for example, to listen to music, or to we are so used to listen to podcasts and to have headphones on, but it was a praxis of radio who brought that to us, a voice without body, in disembodied voice. So this is something we take for granted, but it was invented one day by the media. And so all these questions were question we are investigating, and we are doing this. We did in March already a workshop in South America, and it is very nice that in the Listening Biennale, Diane mentioned, and we are part of this night, there will be also a closing in Bogota, or in Bolivia. With Gailey. So we are a big community actually of listener and radio practitioner gathered today also through events on different parts, and in next year we will do it in Africa. And then we will bring these events back to podcast series and to some events like here today in Berlin in the Haus der Kulturen der Welt. The podcast series will be taken care by Deutschlandfunk Kultur, our cooperation partner. in Germany. And of course, all this had been only possible through the Goethe-Institut and the Bauhaus-University, who allowed us all together in this workshop together. And I want to now to give to meLê, because the thing is that the Bauhaus Listening Workshop are not working without the most important part, the curator, who is coming from the place in the region we are listening to and visiting and choosing all the guests and together the program. So I would like to give over to meLê and thank him by this on this way also for this nice cooperation, and yes, to tell us some words about how was your perspective.
Thank you very much, Nathalie. And thank you, Betsy and Dayang, for the introduction and for this opportunity to be able to echo what we did in Sagada. We've spent an entire week there, really deeply reflecting about how it is to listen, what are the political, social, aesthetic ways through which we listen. No? I was invited by Nathalie and Marcus Gamel, actually. I specifically remember our first meeting at the keynote lecture, at the professorial lecture of Victoria Chachik, who is also a sound scholar. And I particularly remember that in her lecture, she spoke about how we could write about histories of radio and recording, but even the recording devices that we use, the wax cylinders, where do these wax come from? Where do these cables, the aluminum, the copper, that we are all intertwined, the way we listen, not just through the bodies that interact through listening, but the objects, the materials that come from around the world to come together so that sounds could be produced, that sounds could be recorded. And so I think it is important indeed that the idea of listening to the world connects to the different cultures and societies and communities, listening communities around the world. And this edition indeed is Southeast Asia. And it was my responsibility to invite and to bring together different sound artists, sound researchers, whom we thought could come together, no, to talk about and reflect on these listening. So I'd like to shortly take this time as well to introduce some of the participants to the workshop who has been with us for a week. We have Angeline de Dios from the Philippines, whom I've worked with through her sound practice of but combining research but also healing using through sound. We have Ape Aliermo, whom I met in Guelph, Canada, and I'm very happy that you could join us here. Of course, Dayang Iraola for joining us. Yes. Devana Sanayake is not here at the moment, but because of illness. But we've spent also a week with her in Sagada. First, Betsy Enriquez. A workshop and a conversation on radio and listening is not complete without the expert in radio. I've always been running after Betsy already, because I know that every time I write about radio, I think half of my citation would have to come from her book. That's why it's important we have to have Betsy here. Thank you. Yes, Gwen Gaungen, who is the station manager of Sagada Radio. We've spent time with her. Unfortunately, she could not join us today, but thank you, Gwen, for having us as well in Sagada. We will have her in an interview later on. We will hear her voice. Vern de la Peña, the director of the UP Center for Ethnomusicology, has joined us as well. I think he will come as well a little later. We also have Lynn Amnandar Hatu from Myanmar. I'm now based in Amsterdam, in Berlin, so it's rare that I get to come to Southeast Asia, but I've been following Lynn's practice, and I'm very, very happy that we could spend a week together. We also have Rani Jambak from Indonesia. Same, I've been a fan of her work. You will know more about their practice later on. It's part of the program. We also have Ria Rizaldi from Yogyakarta. and also Rose May Nibuang from Singapore. We also have Sol Maris Trinidad, also of the UP Center for Ethnomusicology. Trong Kechi from Vietnam. And Victoria Yam from Malaysia. It was also, as a curator, it was also a conscious decision for me to also look for sound practitioners who might have been concealed by oftentimes particular ways that we listen, particularly when we consider maybe masculine and feminine, which are of course all construct, but I think that I've been purposefully following these beautiful sound artists' practice from a distance because I've been interested in a sound practice that is situated perhaps in different places. For us, it has been a week where I've been privileged to have heard practices from Vietnam, from Myanmar, and they are our neighbors, but we are more attuned to our former colonizers' sound practices than our nearby neighbors. So it was an opportunity to do this. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us here in the Philippines, in Sagada, and now here in Manila. I will now pass the microphone to Julian Fuchs, the director of Goethe-Institut.
Thank you so much, meLê. Hey everybody, it's so nice to be here with you. I was tasked with the impossible job to summarize the workshop, I think, which is not that nice, as we stayed in Sagada for 7 days almost. We had a very long bus ride back and forth, so it was a lot of bonding happening in Sagada. But maybe before I start, both me and also my colleague Angela from the Goethe-Institut, we were so happy to be part of this project, of this esteemed group. We learned so much that was very intense. I'm trying to give a couple of things that I realized during this week, but the good news is also there's a lot of activities today, so you get to experience some of the things, some of the results, some of the observations that we made in Sagada, so try to stay for the whole 5 hours and you might get the gist of what happened there. Maybe to start, listening is such an interesting concept as it's a very open framework, right? It's not looking so much at the sender, but at the complexity of the receiver. So there's already a quite big range of complexity there. And meLê mentioned this esteemed group of experts in the field of sound, listening practices, radio. This group comes from many different countries in Southeast Asia, from Germany, from the Philippines, different regions of the Philippines, and that we tried, or the idea was to sort of already ensure a very different perspectives on listening. When we arrived in Sagada, we started really easily. We just thought or we asked ourselves, each other, what does listening mean to you? And how could the world or the society change if we listened more closely to each other? And that was sort of the starting point of a set of very different activities and different disciplines that we sort of crossed. It was music jamming, it was encounters with the local radio station, it was maybe a bit more academic talks on radio practices or sound archives. A wide array of different activities. You also have the leaflet on your seat, so you can really see what happened there. And then eventually we arrived after these 5-6 days of heavy rain and humidity in beautiful Sagada, which is a very nice place. Hopefully you all get to go there sometime. Also at some conclusions, or we really felt that we bounded over these several questions, and we also thought to keep working on various issues or various. I'm not sure if they are projects yet, but hopefully out of this encounter in Sagada of these wonderful people from Southeast Asia and Germany, there will also be a follow-up. One theme, for instance, was to explore a bit deeper the connections in sound in Southeast Asia. We have a couple of beautiful sound artists that work in this field, also connecting to sound traditions, and would like to explore it a bit further. there was this idea of working more in the field of community radio. We visited Sagada radio. There's a lot of community radios in the region, and there could be a lot of potential in working with this. And there was also the field, I'm really just mentioning a couple of themes. There was also this theme of archives, right? Which is always a bit problematic because a lot of the archives are still in Europe. There's, of course, also some archives here at UP Diliman. There's not a lot of local archives, actually, and that also could be something that could be inspired by the participants or also anybody who deals with these issues. So maybe so short, and I'll pass on to Frederike Moormann, who was also a very important player in organizing the workshop.
Great, thank you. Hello, good afternoon. I have the honor to close this introductory round by introducing Gwen Gauengen, who we met and who was an integral part of the workshop I felt. So I asked her yesterday night to do an interview about her work at the community radio. She is also a radio maker, and she does this radio for and from indigenous people. She interviews her own community, but the radio station, it was very funny. There was a mountain, and the mountain was always covered by a cloud. And up there on the mountain, there's the transmission station. And because it's so high up, it transmits also to other places around. So now we will listen for like 15, 17 minutes to an interview I did with Gwen yesterday night. And after we will hear a song and come to the next part of this listening Tambayan. Feel free also to maybe get some water in between listening to Gwen. And the last thing I want to say about her, she also encourages you to get into contact with her if you have a community radio, if you want to get into community radio, if you want to contribute things to this radio. She's happy to rebroadcast stuff and further exchange with radio makers and lovers, also from Manila. Yes, we're good? Okay. Have a good listen. Hello at the Tambayan in Manila, here from Sagada. We are right now sitting in the studio of Gwen, who's sitting opposite of me, of the Radio Sagada. Gwen, can you maybe for the listeners a bit describe this room here around us?
Yeah. Good afternoon to everybody at the UP Tambayan. We are here at Radio Sagada. This is our studio. It's basically just a small room with some computers, a mixer, our microphone, and yes, this is where we do our programs.
What kind of programs do you do?
Basically, we have news, of course, that we can't do away with, and a lot of other programs that incorporate indigenous people's concerns, other marginalized sectors like women, agriculture, concerns on climate change. We have disaster risk reduction, health, of course. We have other programs also on Cordillera culture. And of course, music programs.
And who is working here with you?
Yes. Radio Sagada is powered by community volunteer broadcasters. So at the moment, we have 3 full-time volunteers who do the broadcasts. One female and two females, myself and Simbai, and one more who is Rafi, our elder at the studio. And we have 2 new volunteers who are helping us with technical things like setting up our social media account so we can also broadcast live and reach out not just to the Cordilleras but the rest of the world.
So you're sending to the Cordilleras, no? And yesterday there were some listeners here in the studio. They were really fans of the So you're not only listened to by Sagada people, are you? So how far does this radio reach?
Yeah, despite our 300 watt transmitter, Radio Sagada reaches 5 provinces of the Cordillera region. So we reach parts of northern Benguet, the province of Ifugao, province of Kalinga, southern Abra, and of course Mountain Province. But we also reach some parts of Ilocos Sur and Region 2 on the Cagayan Valley Strip, like Nueva Vizcaya, as well as Isabela. Fred, I would like to add also that aside from the regular people who work here at the station, we have a lot of volunteers who come up with the programs. So we have religious programs also, and the local government unit and farmers. We have government agencies also who help with the material on air.
When I first met you in the workshop of Bauhaus Listening Workshop, we were talking a bit about how people in power sometimes do not listen, and how you can make them listen to voices that are not heard, and that it's important. And maybe going on with this, you can explain a little bit your motivation to do this and your philosophy behind it.
Yes, because that is exactly why Radio Sagada was set up, is to provide the voices primarily for indigenous peoples like ourselves and other people who have little voice. And as you said, many people in power do not listen to these voices. And we hope that when we do broadcasts about their experiences, when we do broadcasts about their aspirations and their ideas, their thoughts or feedback on what's happening in our society as well as the greater society of the Philippines, and of course at international level, we hope that somehow when we bring these voices out and reach us a larger area, then probably people in power would listen. Or more importantly, those who share the same experiences, who share the same aspirations, would find courage and add to the voice that we already bring out on the radio station. We hope to amplify these voices and make a difference to people in power.
I suppose you're a very great ear also, listening to your own community and listening to what the people have to say. And I wanted to ask you again, after these 4 days we spent together, what is the meaning of listening to you?
This workshop has opened a whole new meaning to listening, because what we say will only have meaning if people listen. And I think that would be a very big challenge about getting people to listen more on Radio Sagada. So it creates a challenge for being more creative, challenge for being more to be factual, to combat all this false information available on the internet, and to make what we put on air substantial. So I guess that what the impact of these activities over the past days is to be more sensitive to the needs also of the listeners.
Yesterday we were also doing a bit interviews together here in this place.
Yes, with some of the listeners.
Yes, and we were asking them what listening means to them and what it means in their mother tongue.
It started on the sounds. Everything is in the sounds. You start to walk, you first make a sounds. So everything starts in a sounds like that. If you go stand, you hear sounds. So everything starts in the sounds.
Mundeng is also very good because so it's if you have mental health, removes your stress. That's one. Also, mundeng to hear from the radio is very good because you hear issues and concerns about the weather, about the concerns of especially in agriculture. That's one. And issues from the barangay. And for example, during the typhoons, earthquakes, and
Maybe you also want to add something
Mm-hmm.
to this in your
Yes.
own mother tongue.
Listening in our language, the Kankanai language, is mendenge. And our companions yesterday were sharing about mendenge. They said that it was very important. Yeah, mendenge is very important because as indigenous peoples, part of being indigenous person is the tradition of passing information, passing stories, passing lessons orally. So it was very, very important that as young children, even as they grow up to be adults, it was really important to listen to what the elders have to teach, or listen to different voices in the community. And one thing our interviewees were sharing yesterday was listening and speaking or making sound is always a two-way process. It's that how do you say this? It makes the magic of communication work. Speaking and listening.
Because we are speaking to the people listening at the UP, and maybe later also the radio of the UP and Radio Sagada. I wanted to ask you if there's something that you wish for or that you want maybe to make the listeners in Manila also sensitive to.
Yes, Radio Sagada is a community radio. We draw in as much participation from the community as we can through ownership. Yeah, so this is a community radio owned by the community of Sagada. We also draw in as much as in terms of participation in the actual broadcast, in the production of the programs, in decision making. We also feel the participation of the community in terms of other forms of support, like their advertisements, what you call the sponsorships for trivia contests and other shows, and of course the spirit of ownership is really felt in these different kinds of support that they give to this community radio. And that I think that is the reason why we have survived over 13 years. Yes, but it has been difficult. It has been fulfilling at the same time. And we also draw in participation from feedback and listening. I think that's the very big role or participation of the community, is to listen to Radio Sagada as a comrade, community radio. And even with this kind of support, we still are vulnerable to many things, many challenges. Number one, the hazards, the threat of typhoons that often destroy our equipment, sometimes put our technicians in danger because of lightning strikes. That brings me to another challenge in terms of budget, because we need to, of course, power electricity, pay rent, and of course, other operational expenses. We also need to develop more community journalists, and this would entail trainings to capacitate our community to participate more in the broadcast, in the actual broadcast. So to all of you who are at the UP Tambayan now, and those who would be listening in the broadcasts over DZUP, we hope that in some ways you can support Radyo Sagada so that we can continue to stay on air. Maybe you can also send us material, because we open our spaces for your ideas, for your music, for various content and forum. You can reach us through phone patch. We can always accommodate that, and help us also to create linkages with other institutions who would make the survival of Radyo Sagada possible all throughout my generation, and hopefully as we develop the younger generation who would power Radyo Sagada in the future.
So maybe if people in UP know some community radios, you would be also happy to connect with them and exchange.
Yes. Linkages is very, very important for Radyo Sagada. Not only because of the possibility of learning from the experiences and knowledges from the different community radios, but more so because we would also like to draw in the other communities into Sagada. Sagada is a small town, needs to be nurtured also, needs to be educated so that they know what's happening in other places. I think more so that they can really count their blessings, that even if we are a marginalized community, there are other communities out there, especially in the metro, who are undergoing so many challenges as a people, as society. I mean, even just gut issues like basic meal for the day. And these things are alien to many people here in the Cordillera. Many have not been able to go outside of their communities. And if other community radios like DZUP can share the experiences of other peoples, then that would also help us be educated and to help us grow more, not just as indigenous peoples, but as people, as Filipinos, as people on this planet. I mean, it's the only planet that everybody lives, whether you are indigenous, you are Manileño, you're educated, you're rich, you're white, you're black, you're yellow, it's the only world we all have.
That's a nice closing sentence, I think. But I
Thank you,
also
Fred.
wanted to ask you whether you can recommend us a song, because I wanted to play a song to the UP audience that you played to me.
Oh, yeah. That's one thing that we also provide here in Radyo Sagada, space, for entertainment. And unlike commercial radio stations who play the more popular songs, or those who have budgets to have their songs played on air, we always accommodate local talents. And we play at the moment some songs by the Sagada Musiceros. One of my favorites is Umali Tayo sa Sagada, Come to Sagada. This was composed by a group of high school students last February as a competition piece during the Battle of the Bands held here in Sagada as part of the Utag Festival. Yeah. So yes, I hope you would listen to this song and enjoy the song. It's a mixture of modern instruments and traditional music with rock and how do you say this? Rock and rap. And it's sung in Filipino with the Kankanaay words. And it speaks about inviting people to come to Sagada. It's an enjoyable place. We sing, we dance, but more so, our culture is rich. It speaks about agriculture and about listening to the voices of the elders. and the spirituality of the place.
Saan ka ba pupunta? Umaling na sa Sagada, puno ng saya at kultura. Mga tao ay mababait pa. Umaling na sa Sagada, kasi ang saya, saya, saya. Kakaiba pag narinig na hanggang saan mapapasayaw ka na. Wala takot, it's Sagada. Diba ang saya, saya, saya.
That's really nice, Fred. I'm really glad that you included the song from the Sagada Musiqueros. We met this group of young people. Yeah, they're not here, but let's give them a hand. The Sagada Musiqueros. It's really, really, it was really a pleasure to have gone to Radio Sagada. And we talk about community radio, especially those of you who are broadcast majors. We talk about what community radio is supposed to be. And there are debates as to, what it should be. That's the structure, the funding and everything, the politics of it. And for me, Radio Sagada, it can serve as a model. So if you get a chance to go there, please pay it a visit and find out what they're doing there. It's really about the community. It's not commercial, so you won't hear, tons of advertisements. It's really about the community. The people of the community run it on a voluntary basis, and they talk about community concerns. Forget about Manila. They they hardly ever talk about Manila, except when there's something going on. In Manila, that's cataclysmic. But it's really about Sagada. And that, for me, is what community radio is should sound like. And I want to ask Fred, do you have this in Germany?
Yeah, we have a lot of small radios, actually, that are also non-commercial. It's not... some are like locally centered, some are around universities. There are also a lot of non-commercial radios and network going on, of course. But also too little network, I think. And network would do these small radio stations good. But what we don't have is these tons of different languages. And I think what made the listeners of Radio Sagada also be moved is to hear Kankanai on radio. And they were tuning in and listening to their mother tongue. And this is an experience, I think, that, we, like in Germany, we don't have, because we have one language.
Right. It's a good thing you mentioned that, because that's the one thing that you will notice. The Radio Sagada speaks to the Sagadans in their language. Okay, so they don't speak in English or Philippine, the dominant language here. So it's really for the community. And right.
But I think worldwide community radio network would be nice. Like it's a nice. We also in the last day of the workshop thought about how the future could go on, and having all these small radios connect to each other is like a dream or something, maybe for the future.
Yeah, I think it's an aspiration that everyone expressed, that we could forge in the future a community radio that is worldwide. a space. Maybe we could use the internet as the technology if that's the most accessible one to all, but a space or sound space where everyone can put in his and her or her voice, their voice. Okay, so Fred, you're going to introduce our next very special number.
I'm going to introduce Rani. Rani will show us a video that actually the group of the workshop also hasn't seen before, or only a few bits of it. And it will show an instrument, I believe, that you built yourself. Maybe you want to tell us what we're going to see in the next 15 minutes or so? Yes.
Hello, thank you, Frederike, for the introduction. My name is Rani Jamba from Indonesia. And the video that I will show you is about an instrument that I built. It's named Kincia Aya. Kincia Aya is actually water wheels, but during my research about this instrument, this water wheels is really unique from Minangkabau because it's not only work for the irrigation, but it also has some pestle that you can make a flour from different material like rice, corn, or coffee, or everything. Because my work is really interested in sound, so I imagine that time when the water wheels work, it can create different sounds when it hit different materials. So this instrument is actually part of my way to celebrate the knowledge of ancestral, because the oldest documentation about these water wheels is from Raffles from 200 years ago. And it's also, I also have a critics about that I bring in this instrument about the climate change, because during my research about the water wheels, it's really rare to find the active water wheels now. Maybe because one of the reasons is also because I cannot find the river that has a strong water that can spin the water wheels. So this composition is called Malenong Maso. Malenong Maso and Malenong Aso. It's basically twisting the time and origin as my way to resonate the sound, what was happened when the water wheels working from long time ago, and bring it to present and maybe to the future as I bring the water wheels as a new kind of instrument, musical instrument. Yes.
So I would say have a good screening this time, not only listen.
I hope you enjoy.
I think we can have 1 or 2 questions from the audience, if anybody's interested in Rani's great work. Here, I will pass it.
I just want to know what that instrument is.
Okay, I repeat the question. The audience member wants to know what that instrument is.
So basically, the original is called kincir air from Minangkabau language. In Bahasa, we call it kincir air, or in English, we call it water wheels. Yes, yeah.
And you built kind of a sampling machine inside, no?
Yes, yes. So I put a sensor under like the surface when the pestle hit it. So it will, because the idea was like the original version of kincir air when it hit the material like rice or coffee or corn, when it hit the pestle hit that material, it can create different sound. So that is the idea how I made this kind of sampling program can create different sounds, like maybe one sound for one pestle, and also it can play different sounds in one pestle too. Yes.
Further question? Nathalie? No. Maybe I had the question what your personal, I find it a really strong movement of this wheel and then the hitting, what your personal relationship to this wind, no, it's not a wind, a water mill is, yeah.
So basically, my background, I was born in Medan, in North Sumatra, but my original ancestor is from West Sumatra, Minangkabau. So I've been questioning myself from the whole time, asking about my own culture, my own cultural identity. So this work is actually part of my journey of learning my own history, learning my ancestral knowledge, and I think when I found out about these water wheels, is really blowing my mind, because I think from kincir air I can learn many things, not only about how my ancestors have that kind of knowledge to build up a mechanic system like this, and also how the environment shaped the culture of irrigation things and plantation, and also about how is the nature landscape long time ago and compared to now, where I live now, and this water wheels really inspires me to learn more about the ancestral knowledge that I think more or many philosophical things or wisdom from ancestral still relate until now, that I think it's really important for us to know as a young generation, to kind of part of way of life, and have kind of problem solving our modern life. Yes. So yeah, it's really intimate for me, because this is part of my journey, learning my own history.
Yeah, welcome back to the second part of this Tambayan, dedicated to the listening and to the practice of radio. We are echoing or resonating what, as a group, we lived in Sagada in the last week. And one of the important parts was our listening stories, our radio stories. We were asking the people to talk about their really personal listening and radio stories. It was very touching moments, very important, as everybody, and I think everybody in the public as well. If you go a little bit into yourself, you will have a radio story. So we invite you in this time, and then also in the next hour there will be a slot to come to us and to tell us this. And I'm happy that Betsy will moderate and interview the people. And now we have also the pleasure to have our Dean, Giovanni Tampang. He was supposed to join us, but then deans are very busy, so we are happy that we have him here, and I think he will start with his listenings or radio story, but he also brought us a presentation about his work and the sonification work he do, which is very interesting. So yeah, thank you, Betsy, for doing the next slot, and Giovanni for joining.
You're welcome, Nathalie, and thank you. Okay. Dean Tapang should have joined us in Sagada, but since he failed to come, he's making up for it by giving us this short presentation. Okay? But before we begin, all right, everybody, those of you who do not know Dean Tapang, Dean Giovanni Tapang is the Dean of the College of Science. But he's interested in sound. And what I know about Gani is that he has been recording bird songs. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we've been recording bird songs for 3 years. Actually, with me is Sky Diaz. She's the one where we started recording for her BS thesis during the pandemic. Maybe Sky, you could tell us what it was about.
So in my undergraduate thesis as a biology student, we placed sound recorders around the College of Science. And as part of my thesis, I listened to a lot of these sound recordings to count the number of bird species present. So that was what my thesis was about.
So since you asked us to bring the sensors, it's really just a small computer. This is a Raspberry Pi, something that we bought from Lazada. You just actually put it.
Hey, that's an ad.
And we actually just hung it up in a window in 3 sites in the College of Science. And this has been uploading to our Google Drives and filling it up with now 15 terabytes of data, already recording for 3 years. We stopped it actually because it was actually filling up our quota, as those from UP would actually know. So this one is really just a microphone. It's just an ordinary microphone, the one everyone bought during the pandemic as a Zoom as a lapel mic, and it's like 50 pesos. The Raspberry Pi originally is just around 3,500. So all of this recording setup pales in comparison to the cost of the high end. Now, and that's why I got involved about listening, about recording sound. I'm a physicist, and for me, everything is really just a signal.
Okay. Dean Gani, you are going to tell us something about making things sing, sonification of the ordinary.
Yeah, so I remember the email Frederike was saying that bring your instrument. The problem, I don't really have that a very nice instrument previously, but let's build an instrument right now. So what we did and what I can do in a few minutes is just to show you how. Of course, you don't really need a computer, but the computer here is really for uploading a program. What you really need is a microcontroller or an interface to convert. Next, please. Next. It's okay. Not a problem. We can continue. This is just an Arduino, for those who would know. It's really just a microcontroller. It's a small computer that interfaces sensors like this one. I'll tell you about the sensor later. And transducers, which convert signals to... Okay, so you can connect different sensors, like light sensors, audio sensors, also known as a microphone, light sensors, also known as a camera, vibration sensors, also known as a microphone as well, infrared, humidity, temperature, other things. You can connect anything, and if you can connect anything, you can convert it to a signal, and if you can convert it to a signal, you can convert it to sound. Now, the other side, next please. and we're going to the demo. So we just connected it here. Right now it's working. The other side of things is to convert the signals to something that you can hear, you can see, or you can feel. So it's called a transducer. And so you have a microphone, it's a sensor, the other side is a transducer. So that's essentially what you have in a microphone and in a speaker. And if you have a microphone and a speaker, if you can build those things and you can imagine to connect all of those sensors to anything that you can feel, then you can make it sing. You can make literally anything sing. So right now I'm trying to make the chair sing. Well, the computer is really there for interfacing. So Sky here will be my dutiful student. Right now it's reading nothing. I think it got pulled up. So 80. So what we need is just to have it interface. So if you're near, I'll make it visible by putting in, I hope you can see the graph. So there are graphs coming in. Sky will try to vibrate it. So you can, the sensor is a vibration sensor, and swinging it around can show it. But that's just a graph, right? So let's convert it to a sound. You can actually just output whatever you hear here and then just re-upload it. Essentially program your, and now as she vibrates it, she makes sound. And if you can imagine that, then that vibration can be any other sensor, and those any other sensors, of course it doesn't sound nice unlike the previous speaker, but lack of musicality, please forgive me, but that's making sound. You can imagine waving around, Sky waving is now Sky singing. So, quote unquote. And therefore, it's not so hard to make things sing. You just have to imagine how to connect a sensor and make a transducer out of the ordinary.
Does that mean those of us who don't sing well can sing?
Well, yeah. Well, at least you can.
Even
beep.
if we're out of tune?
You can beep. So other applications of this, you can connect it to your a jacket, and then you can start dancing, and you can hear yourself dancing.
So there's hope for me.
Right? And or tapping. So if you stop, but you start. So it's a motion detector. So you can replace the sensor with other sensors. Can you show the other sensors, Kay? There are other sensors that we can have, and we can just play around with everything. So this is a light sensor. This is a color sensor. This is a humidity sensor. These are actually little microphones, the same microphone in your telephones, your cell phones. A tilt sensor, a water sensor, so you can actually put it in the roots of your plant, and your plant can shout at you, please water me. So you can literally make things talk. This is an infrared sensor. This is an even smaller computer. So all of these things are available. You can buy it from online shops. We actually wrote the program 10 minutes before we came. That's why we were late eating. And
okay, you're excused.
that's how you actually make things sing. It's not so hard, quote unquote.
Thank you very much, Dean Gani. Thank you.
Sky.
Thank you for that demo. Thank you, Sky. So we should try that later, okay? Yeah, when they're gone, we'll
All right.
steal the toys. Oh, yeah, we're going to jam later.
Okay.
Okay, there you go. He's game.
One more thing. We can even make things sing. Let me just end melody. This is programming on the fly.
Wow.
Please don't do this, kids. Oh, semicolon, sorry. And yeah, go upload. Okay, nabunot na.
Nabunot na, okay. That's it.
That's it. So it's supposed to just play a melody. So you can even just program the melody.
Okay, thank you very much, Dean Gani and Sky. Thank you. All right, and we're gonna put that on the air later. No, we'll schedule that to be aired on DZUP, right? Okay. And speaking of on the air, I'd like to do a couple of short interviews with people whom I know have done radio. Okay, radio stories. I'm gonna start with Jean. Jean, come here. All right. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Jean Barcenas. Jean, you were my student in, what course was that? I can't remember. That was so long. Media.
Yeah. Do I need a mic?
Sorry.
Hello. Media theory and a couple of other...
media and gender.
Yeah, media and gender.
Right.
Yes.
I asked Jean because I know Jean produced a program on gender on radio.
I actually studied a couple of radio programs who were talking about gender during that time. But when in the course of my study, I think I was studying like 4 programs during that time, radio programs. 3 folded up, and so I was left with 1 for my thesis. So I did an extensive study of that in a.
So you produced the programs because you were studying them for.
No, I wasn't. So I did some radio advocacy in the past. I was writing for an NGO, a faith-based NGO called Institute for Studies in Asian Church and Culture. So I was doing radio advocacy and knowing that radio was a really good way to reach people, very specific people, and that I did that for a year. And so I had that inclination towards tapping really radio very strategically. So that's when I got into studying this radio program. So I wanted to see like how very specific cause-oriented groups actually used radio to reach. So some of these radio programs are very, I would say, a bit obscure because not a lot of people know about them. Yeah. So, yeah.
But you produce programs for which station?
So I did write for DZAS, but it was in partnership with NGO. So that was part of my radio advocacy work.
So you had an NGO backing you up.
Yeah, it was an NGO. And then afterwards, in the recent years, I also did some editing of content for radio also.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I asked about
DZAS,
the station because DZAS is a commercial station.
It is, it is.
And so, but you
it's
have...
also faith-based.
Okay. It's faith-based.
Yeah.
So the NGO is also faith-based.
The first one. But this one, it's just a group of... So, sorry, I'm talking about the more recent years. Mm-hmm. So with Pananaw Pinoy, it's a group of just volunteers doing radio editorials. So, and I was editing their content.
Jean, why radio? Why not social media?
Okay, so I was reflecting on this a while ago because, and I realized that radio has been part of my life also, and it's something that we listen to. It's a personal medium, and not quite a private one, mm-hmm. but it's also a very communal medium. Mm. So, as I've said, there are some obscure, or sorry, that's a bit negative, but very specific audiences who listen to this very specific radio programs, and they listen because they feel that they are one with a bigger body. Like, so if these are feminist radio stations, which I studied for my thesis, they feel that they're part of this common cause, and so in solidarity they're listening together. So even if they're not really organizing themselves formally, but it's like it's like a fan base or a fandom. So it's like we're doing something together and contributing to something of a greater cause together. So so I feel like if you want to reach something, a group of people very specifically and really get across a specific cause or a message. So one way of strategically reaching them is through radio. So as I've said, it's communal, it's also very personal.
All right. Thank you, Jean, for sharing that story with us. Let's give her a big hand. Thank you, Jean. Okay, who's my next victim? Oh, here we go. Can you stand? And
hello.
We're performing for the cameras, right? Okay. Can you give us your name?
I'm Sandro Badillo from the UP Film Institute. My experience with radio, me just as a listener. Back when I was in high school, you can buy from the street vendors a radio made in China costing 100 pesos. That has a headset.
100 pesos lang?
Yes, not the full radio. It's like a portable radio.
Okay.
It was very cheap, so whenever there are breaks in class, we listen to radio. Because of the portability of the radio, it allowed me to listen to radio at night with a plug-in earphone. And then I come across a radio show. It's called The Brew Rats, hosted by Tado Jimenez and one of our faculty here, Ramon Bautista. During our youth, that show was very influential to us. Also, the other host there was an activist, Tado Jimenez, apart from being a famous comedian. So, back when I was in high school, what they were talking was very influential to me. In a way, just like film, the radio somehow was a window to me. It opened up a new world to me by just listening to what they were talking.
Okay.
And then eventually, I became friend with the radio DJ because he was an activist and I was part of other group that advocates heroism, social change, and all. And I ended up founding an organization with him in our city. So by just listening to the radio, it extended my perspective about the world.
Wow.
So that's for a youth like me then, it's kind of mind opening. It gave me another perspective about the world because I don't have that kind of access within my family. I came from a working class family. We don't talk about social things. We only care about work, eat, that kind of stuff. So because there are shows like that talks about activism, though they don't talk about it directly, but partially it was discussed. It opened up my consciousness.
Do you still have that radio set?
No.
It didn't survive, huh?
It didn't survive. Also, I live in Marikina. It always flooded there. Our house got swallowed the last typhoon by the flood. Everything we have, we lost it. So, yeah.
But did you find a replacement?
No, I think but that kind of portable radio, because it's made in China, you can still buy it on street vendors. It's costing around 100 pesos to US dollars.
Maybe a little bit more now.
Maybe less, I think.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
because nobody buys it anymore that much, so they're trying to dispose it. So you can buy it way cheaper now.
Okay, one last question. You're a film major, and then a little while ago you compared radio with film?
As a window.
What do you mean?
Film, when you watch films, like even we're from the Philippines, we can watch a foreign films. In a way, it gave us an insight to their culture.
Okay.
So me as a youth, activism wasn't part of my culture then because my parents just sent me to school, go home. So I heard it from the radio, and then when a couple of years after, when I was in university, I have the mobility to go to what they were talking.
Okay, thank you very much for that story.
Yeah, sorry for
Thank
my
you.
language. I'm not fluent in English.
Okay, we hope to hear from you some more, huh?
Yeah, some other time. Yeah.
And what's your future film?
I read your book about radio, so I'm familiar with your work. Yeah. I'm a fan actually of Betsy.
Now I'm embarrassed. Thank you. All right. Okay.
Thank you very much, Betsy, and all the radio talker. I think we heard already a lot of what radio can do, create communities, be a medium of resistance, as Giovanni showed us. It's a very simple and cheap medium, so it can be built all over and used all over. And for this, it was always used also for resistance and for this kind of way of communicating in countries where it's not possible to communicate anymore. So thank you all for sharing, and we will have another block of sharing in the next block. So prepare yourself, and Betsy will come to fish you for the next stories. And now I want to introduce the next block and ask meLê to come. And it is also something we were really concerned about, and it's also very important for the Listening to the World project. We mentioned it a little bit, is the question of the archives. And to the question, do we need archives? What do? If we see here how many cameras and recorder and all this is, so what are we creating? We are creating archives. To whom this material belongs, where this material travels to. And meLê, working also in Europe and founded this kind of treasure. I will not say too much, but of archives which are very old, more than 100 years old. And we were listening together to them, and we will do it here together. And I will not say too much, but I invite meLê, who will show us a little bit about it, this work and this amazing scientific project they are doing. Very important project. And some of the participants of the workshop who have different ears come from, we just heard it in the beginning, from very different countries from Southeast Asia with very different languages and cultural backgrounds. And they borrowed their ears to listen together with us to this old material. So now we invite you to all do it together. Thank you, meLê.
Thank you very much, Nathalie, for that introduction. For this part of the program, I will be first presenting a little bit of a background of what I have been doing for the last 15 years. Joining with me as well is Angeline de Dios, whom I will be having a little bit of a conversation. I'll spend the first 10, come join me, Angeline, yes. And in a little bit, I'll also ask some of our partners and workshop participants to join us on the stage as we listen to some of the archival materials that I have uncovered or perhaps reconnected with, no? But hi, Angeline.
Hi. Hi.
Yes. So bear with me as I spend maybe the first 10 minutes to just give you a little bit of context to how I ended up doing the work that I did. I'll quickly go through some of the slides that I usually carry around. The funny thing, Angeline, is that, perhaps I've traveled around the world presenting this lecture. So this might be the first time that I'm presenting this in the Philippines as well. So I think it's about time that I do this, right?
Yeah.
So I'm meLê Yamomo. I'm a graduate of art studies here in the University of the Philippines. And since 2007, I moved to Europe to do my master's and eventually my PhD. Let's see if this works. Where is on? There. Let's see. Or maybe in this case, boop, boop. There it moves. There. Before becoming, when my first part of my life was actually dedicated to doing theater and music in the classical sense. Back then, I was invested in the idea of a particular form of sound practice that we might call music. But it would take a while before I realized that there is a particular way that this is one particular way of listening, and there are other ways of listening. But I've been involved doing productions. I've actually directed several operas at the College of Music before I left the Philippines, including the Philippine premiere of L'Enfant et le Sortilège. In between 2010 and 2014, I wrote my PhD at the Ludwig Maximilians Universität in Munich, where I wrote this book. It's available on Amazon and other bookshops if you like to get a copy.
Can we get it on Shopee and Lazada?
I think so too.
Yes. There we are.
Yes, plugging. My book entitled Sounding Modernities was a project on listening to migrations of music and performance in the 19th century. At the bottom of this, I was looking. It was here in UP that I heard that Manila was already intertwined with opera in the 19th century. So I was lucky enough to get funding from the German Research Council while I traveled to different cities around Southeast Asia, looking at archives, kind of looking for proofs, evidences of this. And indeed, what I found is that as early as in the 1860s, there would be opera companies who would come to Manila, and they would bring about 25 opera productions, and they would stay here for 9 months playing all these operas. So Manila was intertwined with an entire network of music making. But in the end, while I was thinking about this notion of opera, I think during my second and a half year of my PhD, I had a little bit of a crisis because at that point, the way that I was writing my dissertation, which could have gone very, very fast and easy because there were just so much materials that I found in the archive. But what I realized is that I did not want to write a footnote to European history of opera because I realized that most of my education has been an insistence that European music is a universal form of listening. But that was something that I was trying to ask for myself. So my entire project shifted towards how were the locals listening. So I was tracing how these musicians came to the Philippines, to Indonesia, to Vietnam, to Thailand, to Malaysia, and also Singapore. And I was just curious, how can we hear what they were hearing? Because most of the time, most of opera history is just telling this is what it sounds, and it assumes that we would listen to it all in the same way, in the same manner. So my project shifted towards a listening project. And I created this theory, and I'll just make it very quick because I want to use this later on to frame some of what we will do with some of our participants. So one way I argued that there is a triangulation of sound, body, and in between the sound and the body is a sonus. So which means that if something resounds, the body responds to it. And sound is incomplete until it connects with the body. And that relationship is what I call the sonus. So for example, if I play now the Philippine National Anthem, most of the Filipinos here would have the sonus for the Philippine National Anthem, but I wonder if Frederike or Nathalie would have the same sonus. Now, yes. So I am interested in this relationship. Particularly, we could not assume that the opera that came to the Philippines will have immediately the same sonus. And as we proceed, as I show you some of the work that I'm doing, we would see how this further unraveled. So after my PhD, I did several different projects, a postdoc, several postdocs, a few festivals. I'll just quickly go through them very quickly just so you see some of the context from which I am working. At the same time, I started my work at the University of Amsterdam. By 2017, I received funding from the Dutch Research Council to work on the project Sonic Entanglements. Sonic Entanglements, there. Let's see, did this work? Yeah, Sonic Entanglements is a project where at the end of my book, I realized, okay, if we want to listen to the locals, most of the materials that I was looking at are paper materials. And therefore, I could only conclude from paper materials. But at the same time, I also realized that this is part of the problem. Our history is written based on text. And therefore, if there are cultures that are not necessarily literate to a particular language, or these cultures are not even literacy-based, then an entire history disappears. So I was interested in how can we write history from the perspective of sound. And therefore, I started looking around for archives. How could we listen to sounds of Southeast Asia? And I ended up in different archives all over Europe: the Berlin Phonogram Archive, Vienna Phonogram Archive, the Dutch Institute for Sound and Vision, BBC, CREM in Paris. I found materials from these places, and we will share it to you, and we will talk with some of our colleagues here about these materials. But for now, I just want to say that this was the starting point of my Sonic Entanglements project. In 2018, Dayang is here. So I've organized different workshops where my intent was to reconnect what I found to colleagues in Southeast Asia. So here I bring back my notion of the Sonos, when I realized that when I found these recordings in many of the museums and archives and libraries of Europe, I realized that archives are cemeteries. Cemeteries because these are repositories of dead objects. Because unless these objects reconnect with the bodies from which they are supposed to interact with, these sounds are dead. And so it has been my project for the last 7 years, 8 years, to reanimate these sounds by reconnecting them to the bodies and communities from which they are taken away from, and now they are being kept in these grand mausoleums in Europe, but they remain to be dead objects in these big museums. No? So we did several visits with our partners in Southeast Asia. You could, if you want to hear more about what I've been doing with this, I have a podcast, and there are also some. I've interviewed Betsy in this podcast. If you don't have time to read the book, then you could also listen a short summary. It's a 30-minute summary of Betsy's work. And also there are short articles that are written, and then I ask some of the people that I interview to show samples of what they are listening to and explain how they listen. It's not so. At the very tail end of my project, we've began the project called Sonic Returns, Repatriating Sounds in Exile. It was not something that I was able to imagine at the beginning of the project, but within the span of my work, I've connected with different archivists, museum directors, librarians, who found this need as well to reconnect these objects with the community. So we are now at the beginning of repatriating some of these sound materials, and some of them will be brought to the UP Center for Ethnomusicology. Next week, we will be meeting in Kuala Lumpur to connect some of our partners in Southeast Asia so that there will be places to return these sound materials. Here you see, for example, Sol is over there as well, where we are symbolically now showing that we are returning some wax cylinders from 1937 recordings that are made by a Hungarian composer, János Takács. These wax cylinders are not yet digitized, so we are in the process now of trying to digitize them so that we could digitally repatriate these materials. And on the right side are materials of the Jaap Kunst. So the Jaap Kunst practically invented ethnomusicology. He is Dutch, and so we are trying to bring as well recordings from Indonesia between 1919 until about 1935. After Sonic Entanglements, I've also received funding from the European Union to begin a project called Decolonizing Southeast Asian Sound Archives, in which some of our partners, including Betsy and Vern, even Gani, are all members of this Decosias project, including partners in Southeast Asia, where we are trying to develop different programs so that One of them is repatriation, but we also include digitization. So one of the things that we're trying to do is that, including the wax cylinders that I have shown earlier, we want to digitize them. We also want to create a platform. We call it an aggregation platform, because I realized when I was researching, if I want to write about the sound history of Southeast Asia, because most of these materials are in Europe, I also need to speak the language. I could not even search online. So this platform is intended to translate and become accessible through the lingua francas in Southeast Asia, including Tagalog, Malay, Vietnamese, Khmer, Thai, among other languages. We also, here it is. So that's called Southeast Asia Hearing. We are hoping to release the alpha version in 3 weeks' time when we meet in Kuala Lumpur. We also develop a Southeast Asia EU visiting fellowship where we invite artists from Southeast Asia to come to Europe to work with these materials so that not only they remain alive, but also they continue to grow, that the archives need to reconnect with communities and bodies who could imagine new futures for these sound materials. I just want to quickly show as well that based on this, I realized that I could not remain, I've kind of did this detour that I left my artistic project, went a little bit through research, but I circled back to artistic research and artistic project because I realized that while I was sitting in these archives, that there are things that just sitting down and writing books would not allow me to explain what was happening with me in these archives, that it is through my embodiment of this sound that I could reconnect and bring back to life these works. So I've worked as well. I've developed and created new theater and sound pieces, including Echoing Europe, Sonus, The Sound Within Us, Forces of Overtones. And because of the works that I've been doing, I received funding from the Berlin Senate, who invited me to create a festival on the exact same thing, the way that I am thinking. And I think one of our first collaboration with Angeline was here. Is your picture here? Yes, there is Angeline over there. And I invited Angeline as well to come to Berlin. So in this festival, I also invited different artists from different backgrounds, mostly post-migrant backgrounds, and also reconnect create South and South conversations. Angeline, you partnered with
the Colombian DJ and producer Isabel Gonzalez Toro.
Right, yeah. And you created Peace together, no?
Yes, in 1 week.
In 1 week, yes.
An opera director's timeline.
Yes. And I think the only brief that I gave Angeline and Isabel is at that time I was thinking, okay, if you do not have to perform for the white, male, hetero, cis, normative position, what will your sonic utopia be? And so in 1 week, there are different artists who created different creations based on this very seemingly simple, but in the end quite difficult in the process brief. And we premiered different pieces based on this. No? I think one of the things that I wanted to show before I now move to playing some of these materials, I wanted to show a scene from the piece Echoing Europe that is on the repertoire. So this has been playing at the Bauhaus-Listening.Workshop in Berlin since 2019. So it's 4 years now since it has premiered. There's a particular scene where I showed a postcard from 1910 of a Sugbuanon who is in front of a gramophone, and I think there's an American soldier in front on the other side of the gramophone. And something that I realized since I began this work as a Filipino who is now based in Europe about the difficulty of or the process or the politics of how the sound and listening is intertwined with a lot of these big historical forces that surround us and that oftentimes premise the way that we listen. I've always asked about how am I not replicating colonialism in the work that I do? How am I not extracting the sound from my home country and gaining profit from it as an artist, as a scholar in Europe. Because in the end, it is the intent behind sound that shapes as well the kind of relationships that we build based on these sounds. And therefore, this is something that I constantly reflect on in how I think about how to reconnect these sounds back to the community, and also ensuring that maybe some sounds are not intended to be listened to by certain groups of people because they are there to empower marginalized communities. And so this has also shaped the work that I do now in the Listening to the World workshop that we did in thinking about who do we invite in the listening, and maybe there are practices that we'd like to share to the world, including some of what you've seen and you will continue to see, but at the same time, how do we ensure that they are not taken over by other forces that might hegemonize this sound? No? I would like to, at this point, invite some of our colleagues on stage. Kechi, Rani, Riar, and Victoria. If you would like to join us on stage, we probably need an extra chair. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Betsy. Sure. Thank you, Betsy. But while they're coming, maybe Angeline has some comments or notes.
Thanks for that. I know how tough it is, meLê, to sum up your life's work in a 10-minute presentation.
Here, so, Rani, is there enough seats? Yeah, Kechi is over there, so maybe you could join me here. Yes.
Close tayo.
Very cozy.
Yes.
Yes.
Tambayan, kwentuhan, lambingan.
Tambayan, yes.
It's a pleasure to be. Yes, tambayan, lambingan. It's such a pleasure to be here in this group of friends that we respect and admire so much and just feel an immediate kinship with. And I feel that kinship and belonging and community are very good starting points for this discussion that we're about to have. And I'll throw the first question to you again, meLê. So I feel that everybody in the room has some kind of resonance with the work of listening, with the work of archives, the very simple, sincere desire to recover some kind of lost history as a way to respond to the trauma, the confusion, and the deep despair that we're facing in our present and our future. Now, I also know that this work of retrieving sonic memories and sonic histories through archives is such a lonely endeavor. It's lonely, and if you are an outsider, if you are an Asian working in a white space, even if you are privileged as a foreigner, as a foreign scholar, as you were, and even tenured, I know that you face a lot of just everyday blockages that have roots in very, very deep, like centuries of prejudice and exclusion. So why was it so important for you, one, to go through this long and lonely ordeal of retrieving the archives and then bringing it to a community? What is the significance of you bringing it? I suppose we could say that you're expanding the sonic space to be a collective one. Why is that important?
Thanks, Angeline, for the question. I think it's always, there's always this notion that research is, research is something that is objective and not subjective. No, but what I realized, of course, in my art and in my academic journey, alongside my artistic project, is that research is never objective. It always begins with a very deep question that we face, and at a personal level. And I think this question that I've started asking began when I have to grapple with a lot of things and processes that I began to unravel when I came to Europe. I realized that, I think I realized that in a way, first when I was here in the Philippines, I thought that because if you go to College of Music, for example, that you study a particular repertoire, a particular canon, and that if we imagine that we are part of this history, and then you come to Europe and you feel exclusion. That on the one hand, we've been a lot of my friends who are classical musicians here would know Brahms, would know Bach, would know Beethoven, and then you come to Europe, but the particular body that you have is excluded, despite the fact that you might have the same sonus. And to me, the sonus is colonialism. To me, it happens in the sonus level, because it would be implanted to you, and we become part of this history. But on the other hand, it doesn't communicate back. That I know their music, but they don't know my music. So there's this particular one way that the entire listening practice is directed. Right. And so this was the starting point of my question, and therefore there were moments of loneliness where I hear you, but can you hear me? That was kind of the starting point of I need to I could communicate with them. I would understand contemporary issues in a way that I would watch opera, and that they would use the opera as a way to refract or reflect current issues, and I get that. But I always ask, but do you get where I come from? Do you hear what I'm trying to say as well? No? And so to me, it was important as well to listen to these materials, these archives, which are also canons, this extension. I would say that operas are archives as well, because music is only alive if you play the music. And therefore, concert halls are archive because it's a place where you keep playing them so that they remain alive. Right. But if we choose only specific forms of music, but again, this is the politics of sound. If you sound something, then you are silencing something. Yeah. So therefore, if you keep playing something, then you are silencing other things. And so therefore, how can you ensure that archives that also play back the sound creates democracy of what listening practices remain at equal level? And therefore, these I'm very excited now in a way that I think it has been my calling out to get out of my loneliness, to reconnect the archives that I found with the community from where I come from. And I'm extremely happy with this workshop that we did, because I think for the very first time, I think I managed to bring some of these recordings back to Southeast Asia and reconnect them with bodies from Southeast Asia. And so that the sonus could emerge by reconnecting them with the bodies. Right. So I'd like now to take this opportunity to share some of the sounds that I have found in Berlin and play some of them, and then maybe ask some of our colleagues to maybe share with us how these sounds are resonating with you. I will postpone some of the framing. There are contexts through which these recordings are made, and we'll speak about it in a bit, maybe along the way. But let's begin by playing a few materials. Oops, sorry. Clicker. So these materials come from the Lautarchiv of the Humboldt University in Berlin. The first recording is from 1918 by Nguyen Van Diep. Yeah, Van Diep. I'll play it first so we could listen to it.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 10, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 40, 41.
I'm going to ask Kechi perhaps to respond to what we've just listened to.
So maybe I have some word to introduce me first. I'm Kechi. I'm I'm an artist and I'm so curators in visual and film domains. So one of my practice is not just doing my own things, but also observe and seeing things around as curators. So to respond to from what I heard, from now I want to show another excerpt of sound answer.
Thánh minh quân đại thánh nhân quân cố chế hàm thượng đại nhân yêu xuân rất đông yêu xuân đền đỏ sang tế tỷ đỏ sang văn tam vương hào hào tam vương thánh ngũ đế đầm đầm ngũ đế quân kim nhật thiêng vùng kim nhật đệ thái hưởng thiên tử thái hưởng dân.
So I just want to share to meLê that actually it's the same man. Really? Yeah. So after your sharing in the workshop at Sagada, I just remind me of. I mean, I'm sorry for this time. I didn't remind of this project, but after I realized they actually already are sound projects realized in Vietnam in Ho Chi Minh City in 2021. Câu hồi sống is a mean like returning sound, returning way, and there are several archive of this kind of sound from the same archive were there, and it's a project by Sanark, an independent art space in Ho Chi Minh City, and they invite 2 young sound artists from this generation to also have a reply for this kind of documentation. So it's also something already begins in Vietnam, but so I'm happy to share with you. And for the first excerpt that you guys heard from meLê, it's the counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and the sound that I just shared with you guys is the song about a Chinese tale about emperors, and from what I know, the man at this time he was 26 years old, and he's come from his accent show that he's come from not of Vietnam, from the province of Hải Dương. So it's resonate a lot with me to heard again about the sound from someone from more than 1 century ago, and it's very touching more because I know already about the situation and the context of this sound, about the body and the sound and the body at the same time. Maybe I let you share with the audience later, but I just want to share that it's very important for me, not just me, but also my friend and my colleague in Vietnam, to try to reconnect with the past, not just in visual, archive, but also sonic archive. It's like to hear the past, but also hear the ancestor, but also I think it's the way to hear and understand more the present and help us to how to live, in the present. If you don't understand it, you cannot understand, in the complexity of the past, and we don't have the sound. So maybe some another things. When I think about this sound, it's a sound come from a man. So I just wonder, what is the sound of the woman? Maybe the family of his lover or his mother, and maybe one of the first recording of the sound from a Vietnamese is from a sound from a man. So where is the sound of woman? Yeah, so it's another thought from me.
Thank you, Kwechi. I will play the next one, but just to quickly annotate what you're looking at, this is a personal bogan and a protocol where each of the subjects who were being recorded there are data that are asked from them. They're in German, but they're asked for their names, a genre of what they are resounding, counting, as which she has noted. It might also include where they are from, their date of birth, which would be here, what languages they speak. But at the very, very, very bottom, you would also see that there are handwritten notes. So some of those who recorded would make annotation of what they were hearing. And some of them might say, the voice is very nasal, it sounds like this person has cold, something like this. And here is also a moment to see how maybe the German ears were listening. For example, I found that in the Thai record, that not note of like, it sounds very nasal, it sounds like the person has a cold, but of course, a Thai speaking would always sound like to a German, like the person has a cold, because of the register. So we see that throughout history, this listening are also documented. I'll play the next one, which is by Muhammad bin Haji Abdurrahim in 1917. And I'll first play the audio.
Satu karung mendua karung, mari dikirim di negeri Cina. Kapal serentak di tengah ngarung, jom lalu pula bertanya. Dari Gresik ke Surabaya, singgah memetik kontum jelema. Nasib sudah badan saya, takdir Allah mesti terima. Anak Cina berjual kayu, anak Keling berjual kain. Tangkai bunga yang sudah layu, embun menitik di desa yang lain.
All right, could we ask our colleagues Rani and Riyar to share with us some of their thoughts? Oh, sorry, no, Victoria, yeah, to share your thoughts about what you just heard.
Yeah, I can talk. It's in Malay, but I think it's like a different kind of Malay that we heard today. It's very much similar to Indonesian, actually. And Indonesian language is a very constructive language as well because it was nation-building idea. But anyway, I think it's a form of pantun. And pantun in Indonesia, or in Malay, in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore, like Malay culture, it's a verse where you have this structures of A, B, and I think the person was telling his story, his life story through this form of pantun, and it's quite really interesting because the second verse he was talking about from Philippines to Surabaya, which means that from Philippines, this island, to Surabaya, and Surabaya it's like south in Java. That's the first verse, and the second verse he was talking about I'm a person and I just like how do I say that, like ikhlas, what is ikhlas in English, like surrendering to the destiny, to the faith and faith, yeah. And then I think he's somewhere outside the region, I think, because he's talking about his journey. But Rani maybe can talk about that.
So I have 2 points after listening to this recording, because I was born and raised in Medan, which is very close to Malay culture. So we have pretty similar like in Malaysia, but in different sultanates, sometimes I found like a bit different when they talk with the vocal or o. Like for example, if you ask like where you wanna going, like nak kemana in Malay is also something like this. In Medan area, it's also a kind of same. But in Batubara, it's nak kemano. So it's quite different. And I was surprised because it was recording like 100 years ago. And as Ria said before, that the structure or the language that he speaks is really, really constructed like Indonesian language, a modern Indonesian language. So I'm curious what happened or where he was come from, or part of meLê 100 years ago. And also, yeah, I was a bit emotional. I told meLê because, oh my God, I've been searching for a long time where I can find sound archive from long time ago, and I really hope that I can find something from Minangkabau maybe that can help me to have a deep understanding about history that maybe can also relating to manuscript that I just did a research to reinterpret the manuscript into music performance, because I think, of course, the logical or the cultural way of thinking can correlate between the sound recording and also what written in the manuscript.
Yeah, I would also add a little bit, but from the three tracks, every first verse, it's always also related to geography. Like he was talking about also one it from China and then something like that, right? So it's kind of like really interesting. It seems that he documented his journey.
Yeah, it feels like I just know that Surabaya is already established from 100 years ago.
Yeah,
like, yeah.
Maybe at this point, I'd like to put a little bit frame to what we've just heard a little bit, a bigger frame, In the 1910s, there's a German linguist who actually had the ambition of creating an encyclopedia of the world. So he approached the Emperor of Prussia, which is where Berlin was part of at this time, his point of history, Germany, to ask if he could fund this project. Because this was the beginning when sound recording was starting to develop. The emperor said, well, we can't do that. The war is about to begin and we don't have money. However, the world is in our backyard because at this point, there are many war camps where many people from around the world are being put. So a lot of these voices that we hear are actually voices of war camp prisoners. And you might wonder what would a Malaysian or a Malay or a Vietnamese doing in the war camps. It's also good to remember that during wars, alongside, of course, the European bodies, oftentimes they would import their colonies to Europe to fight the war. So which means that the British would actually send as their first troops, usually the Malay, the Indians, and Pakistanis. So they are the ones often who are being shot, And so this intertwined history of colonialism is that many brown bodies were fighting the wars in Europe. And so some of them would be caught, and that is why they would end up in war camps. And so these voices that we heard, including Muhammad bin Haji Abdurrahim, would probably, so pantun is, as you said, a poetry form, which is very spontaneous. No? So they would be asked, can you recite a poem? And that means that that this person would have made a spontaneous pantun. So it's like balagtasan in Filipino, but it would be very spontaneous. They would know the ABAB form, so there's a structure to it, there's a logic to it, but you do it spontaneously. And my suspicion is that he told his journey of going from meLê, going to Manila, going to Surabaya, and then how he ended up in Europe. And in a way, one of the things that we could think is maybe he was probably embedding a message in this battle in the hope that whoever would hear it would also tell his journey. And usually it also ends with the kind of the last line usually of a pantun is a bit hopeful or a little bit.
Yeah, it's usually the last line or the last verse is the message. So the first and second verse is usually the analogy, and then the third and then the fourth it's either the message or mostly the message. But sometimes in the wedding it's hopeful, but sometimes also you can have this like a pantun battle, like a rap battle actually, and quite often it's quite attacking. But I think in the old days it's mostly about this hopefulness and then the message, like a wisdom, like a wisdom mostly.
Thank you, Riyar and Rani. Victoria, yeah, not yet, yes. Sure. I'll play the next one. We have 4 recordings. I just wanted to quickly play some of them. So this one was in 1925, which means the war was over. So they continued the project and they approached embassies and asked embassies, is there somebody who's staying here from your country who would like to be recorded? So in 1925, they approached Raden Mas Jojana. He is Javanese. He's a performer, and he's a master of different performing arts tradition from Java, touring Europe at that time, and he was also recorded. So I'm going to play now the audio.
Pancar kitip, wayai kang wengi, puter benggol, lomunyo sauran, kaluru ayam manani. Barung swaraning paswarum, mrak jag-jagan neng payonmu. Sanyo leranggu ka marang santri suku katampan tasmitaneng mrak santri samyo anyam itu wasuti agana yata yata.
Would somebody who live in Indonesia might want to share something?
Yeah, it's I cannot understand. Maybe I can understand only like 10%, but the rest it's very hard to understand because this is a chromo Javanese. So in Javanese, there's the different kind of like layer of languages, and this one is quite high Javanese. So quite often this high Javanese only spoke or only used by the royal family or like like the, how do you call that, like the people who lives in around the royal palace. So my Javanese understanding is very street Javanese, like a very low Javanese. Street Javanese, and I think in Java, this kind of language also is very rarely used. It's only used by people who are maybe my grandfather's age, and all, or maybe the Sultan, and then his, his crew inside the royal palace. But yeah, it's very hard for me to understand. But I guess it's kind of like also a mourning, like morning singing, and I'm sure that he's really trained to perform this, but it's a very different kind of like contemporary Javanese, especially in Yogyakarta. That's because I understand Javanese, but this one is like it's quite tough.
Maybe Rani would like to add something.
Not very specific, but I can hear like some part of the singing, like pretty like Chinese pattern melodies. Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting.
Thank you. Due to time, I'll play the next one, and I think some of us would recognize this who in our audience, because this is Gabriel Adriano, who is a Filipino. He's actually a librarian of the University of the Philippines. We're still figuring out why he ended up in Berlin at this time. Let's listen to what he recorded.
Sa kapuluang Pilipinas ay may 3 pangkat ng maraming mamamayan na gumagamit ng kanilang sariling wika. Na bagaman may bahagyang pagkakaiba ay iisa ang pinagmulan. Ang mga wikang ito ay ang Tagalog, ang Bisaya at ang Ilocos. Bawat pangkat ay may paniwala na ang kanilang sariling wika ang dapat palaganapin. Ngunit pinakamarami ang naniniwala na ang wikang Tagalog ang sukat pag-aralan at pagyamanin ng lahat. Kung mapapagkaisahin din lamang na ang isa sa tatlong wikang di magkakaiba ng pinagmulan ang gagawing wikang pangbansa. Ang mga dalubhasa, maging Pilipino at maging taga-ibang bansa na nakakikilala sa maraming katangian ng wikang Tagalog ay nagkakaisa sa matibay na paniwala na ang wikang ito ang talagang dapat maging pangbansa sa kapuluang Pilipinas. Ang Ama namin, sumasalangit ka, sambahin ang ngalan mo, mapasaamin ang kaharian mo, sundin ang loob mo dito sa lupa para ng sa langit. Bigyan mo kami ngayon ng aming kakanin sa araw-araw at patawarin mo kami ng aming mga utang para ng pagpapatawad namin sa nagkakautang sa amin at huwag mo kaming ipahintulot sa tukso at sa ito pang masasama. Yanawa. Ilang talatang hango sa tulang Florante at Laura ni Francisco Baltasar, hari ng mga Makatang Tagalog. Sa loob at labas ng bayang Punsawi, kaliluhay siyang nangyayaring hari. Kagalingay at bait ay nalulugami, ininis sa hukay ng dus at sikhati. Ang magandang asal ay pinupukol sa laot ng dagat ng putyat linggatong. Palang magagaling ay ibinabaon at inililibing sa walang kabaong.
Angeline.
Yes. Yes, meLê.
Philippine represent. Would you like to speak to the recording that we just heard?
Sure. Actually, I was entranced looking at you while you were listening, and I'd like to take that as a departure point. While the recording was playing, I saw looks of curiosity and wonderment and recognition and a little bit of disbelief, right? When we heard, we all felt collectively this giggle coming out of us as he was reciting the Ama Namin. So, yes, how do we? I feel like this is such a beautiful illustration in practice of this theory that meLê has been trying to so carefully craft, this theory of the sonus. What we just witnessed is the sonus, the interplay of the sound, the physical sound of the recording retrieved from collected 100 years ago, retrieved, stored in the cemetery of the Berlin Lautarchiv. And then when it hits these particular bodies, through the technology, I would say not just the physical technology of digitizing and playing it, but really the social technology, the institutional technology that got meLê the money, that got meLê through the archives, that got him to the workshop space, and that got us through here. There's a whole infrastructure of relationships and resources and political decisions, micro and macro, that created this magical moment. But it's also, for me, a moment that is fraught and is complicated. Yes, there is this, there's this mysterious thrill of recognition that we feel when we encounter a piece of ourselves that we didn't know existed, that we didn't know even belonged to us. And yet we are also all too aware that the conditions that brought about this meeting, this encounter of the sonus, are violent and ordinary circumstances that take a lot of time to change. And they don't change, right? So the colonial sonus is enshrined in our institutions. Who gets access to the archive? And then what do we say about it? So I find that it's a daring, and it has all of these layers. It has that kind of sentimental, emotional layer, but then there are also kind of more serious processes of political deliberation and really creative deliberation, artistic and ethical deliberation that is encapsulated in this tiny moment of listening. That was what I felt listening for the first time to Gabriel Adriano's piece 2 months ago. meLê asked me to engage with the piece as a chant artist, and I built a live performance around it. And it had, for the sonus of my body, listening to the verses of Florante at Laura brought me back to memorizing the poem in high school, the tedium of that, and then the kind of disbelief that how did I not have the ears as a high school student na tumalab na siya talaga sa akin ngayon? And hearing the Ama Namin is personally resonant for me because, one, I pray it every day. I make it a point to pray it every day in Tagalog. I feel that that act of oration and prayer is a way to connect me to my immediate ancestors and to my own kind of internal spirituality. But then I'm also very aware of the colonial baggage of it, that we can't, and we know as artists that we can't forget that. But we can't do it the old way of, okay, here's the piece and write a paper or something about it or do a nice conference presentation about it. We know that that really doesn't go anywhere. Or it goes to the places where it doesn't serve the decolonial project of opening new histories and futures of listening. So I'd like to kind of take this little opportunity to throw the question back to the artists in this space that given that we all need, I think I'd like to start with Victoria, because even though you didn't work specifically with these archives, your work as a DJ, as a musician, is involved in kind of retrieving these archival frequencies of your culture and then putting it in a new context. So why is art making such a necessary and personal way for you to engage with these archives in a new way?
Okay. I think for me, throughout my years DJing, playing in club spaces and also experimental rave spaces, I realized that the hedonistic nature of rave spaces was lacking meaning and also texture in like sounds. And I felt like I was given the opportunity to be in this kind of space, and I wanted to add meaning into my DJing. And also as a musician, I felt like I have the opportunity to learn about healing rituals in Malaysia, and specifically a healing ritual called Mak Yong that exists in the north of Malaysia, which is close to Kelantan. And I noticed that the practice of the healing ritual is very similar to of a DJ, and the connection that the DJ has with the audience is pretty much the same as like the shaman and a sick person. And to me, people who come to the club or people who go to parties, they often are seeking answers, or they're seeking something. They want to experience freedom through music, and I felt that it is very similar to a healing ritual. And so I felt like being able to study the frequencies, the healing frequencies of the ritual has helped me in my music making process as well. So when I produce music, I would use these frequencies and to make music, and I felt it really changes the atmosphere of club dance music when I play them in the club. Yeah.
Riyar, maybe? Rani? Yeah.
Yeah, as I talked before, like my musical work is kind of part of my finding self journey and about finding my root journey. So I've been thinking, when I started to record sound, I was thinking like we are the future ancestor, like we are preparing something for the next generation, like everything that we hear today, and we realize that all the recordings are really important for us in terms of shaping our true identity. And I feel like, I really want to continue the project, like collecting sound from Indonesia. I already started from many places around Indonesia. I call it like Suara Nusantara, and specifically, beside of this project, understanding more about the sound archive is really, really helping me in my contemporary work, as young generation can have more creativity in their understanding of their roots and also express it in new way in terms of music performance. Yes. Yep.
Thank you, Rani. I'm afraid time is up for this particular session. All of us will still be hanging around for the next 4 hours. So please don't hesitate to approach any of us to continue the conversation. We're taking a 5-minute break. Is that right, Nathalie? Or going straight ahead?
No, we go straight ahead. We will
All
make
right.
some little changes of of people on stage and everything, but actually we will not make a big break. But I thank everybody to having created this sonic body together here with the participant, but also with the whole space and the listener, which we could really feel. And I invite you now to open the next sonic body, because we will listen to a piece from Ape Alermo, Simula, and it's a very strong piece and has to do also with the sonic body. I think at least women who gave birth will recognize. Yes, we will do that now, and thank you everybody for having shared in the public.
So welcome back to the echo of the Bauhaus-Listening.Workshop 2 at Sagada, where we were the last week, also with Ape sitting next to me. But first, before we come to her piece, I want to announce 2 things. The first thing is that we are not going to have the Radio Stories Part 2, but that this session will be only 40 minutes long, so that we can have a little break afterwards. And then also, after the session, you will have the opportunity to take part in a more workshop format by Nathalie Singer, standing also here in the room. She will do a blind walk, or offer you a blind walk. So this is part of her practice. We also did this in Sagada, closing the eyes and having a blindfold and going through this city space and listening to the surroundings, the environment. And I can promise that it's a nice listening experience. So you can contact Nathalie after this part. And then later on in the evening, you will have the opportunity to share your thoughts about what you heard and your impressions. But first of all, here's Ape, and Ape Alermo will share her piece with us, which is a piece about birth. Ape, do you want to introduce your piece?
Sure. Thanks, Frederike, and thanks for being here and letting me share this live. So the work I do usually tells hidden stories or ignored stories from Black, Indigenous, and women and non-binary folks of color. I like to find these stories and then retell them just through sound. So for this piece, I had the privilege to access the Canadian granting system, and I was able to pay these women for their sounds. I put a call out for participation, and they recorded themselves giving birth. And I composed this piece, got their approval before putting it out in the world, and they gave me consent to just show it. And apart from recording themselves, one of the partners of the woman giving birth, he recorded electromagnetic sounds for me from the hospital while his partner was having a C-section. So I think it kind of like gave him something to do because he was very nervous. And then afterwards, a few weeks after they each gave birth, I interviewed them about their emotional journey. And based on that, I sampled and edited and basically filtered and recomposed all these sounds based on their emotional journeys. It's meant to be an 8-channel sound installation, so 8.2 actually, 8 channels and 2 subwoofers, and there's a generative audio responsive visual that goes with it that is live and created by Sahar Homami. And then the installation itself was produced and supported with Rose Bolton and Kat Estacio, all in Toronto. So today we're listening to a stereo version, but you can imagine with the actual installation, you're like in the center and the sounds of these women are, you know, kind of just shifting and moving throughout the room. And the last thing I want to say is that in creating this piece, there's a very fine line of listening to these women and their sounds and trying to retell their stories in a way that feels genuine and true to them, and then also taking my own artistic liberties with their sound. So I had to be very mindful of that. So a lot of listening on so many different levels. This piece is titled Simula. Both my parents are from here in the Philippines, and they migrated to Canada in the 70s, where I was born and raised. So to me, Simula is, as you know, the beginning. So I invite you to close your eyes. It's a 16-minute piece. I would even turn these lights off if possible. And yeah, listen to these women. Thank you.
Oh yeah. Baby. Kamu sedih.
So it was just dark in the room, and we listened to this very strong piece, and now we are a bit, the brightness is a bit much, maybe, for all of us. But Ape, how are you deciding in the listening process to these recordings to focus so much on the screaming? I asked myself while listening.
So, as I mentioned, I interviewed all the women and really focused on their feelings and the different stages of their feelings, and then based on this, sort of synthesized 5 different movements. And the interesting thing was that there were 3 different births. One was 2 hours long, one was 3 days, and one was a C-section. And again, the sounds that I work with are from Black, Indigenous, and women of color and non-binary folks. And the interesting thing was, despite their very different births and coming from slightly different places, they all had a very similar emotional journey. And so based on that, came up with these 5 different movements that the 16-minute makes. You know, I don't remember exactly the movements right now, but they all said they were kind of nervous and scared at the beginning and just wasn't sure what to expect. And for some of them, it was their second and third birth, and they still felt that way. And then they were just like tired, and then it got really violent and visceral and animalistic. One of them actually thought it was over for her, and then just leading into this like super extreme exhaustion. And when the baby comes, they all felt this way, but it was like the most intense, unusual kind of love they could ever feel, coupled with like being so exhausted and confused, and just tired. So again, you know, there was a fine line with like listening to these sounds, listening to them, and then taking creative liberties and trying to express their stories, because I wanted it to be true to their feelings and their journey. And I did my best, and I got their approval. So yeah, it's good to get their approval.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
You will all have the opportunity after the next 20 minutes or so session to maybe ask AP personally about her work, because because you will be here for the rest of the time also. Now we're having Ria up here, and we will show his film, which is a very different. We maybe need to gather our attention in a different way, or reassort ourselves a bit on our chair, for a very different film and feeling and topic that more connects with the topics we had before, about colonial archiving. Hello, Ria.
Hey, Fred.
We're gonna show now your film Tellurian Drama again. We already watched it in Sagada together and had a really interesting discussion. The film is basically a mixture of a documentary of a telegraphy station and a more utopian story, I would say. Maybe you want to say a few introductory words to your film before we watch it.
Yeah, it's kind of like mix fiction, non-fiction. It's a film about this early radio stations in Indonesia built by the Dutch. It's called Radio Malabar. And Radio Malabar is probably one of the earliest radio telegraphy stations in Southeast Asia. It connects Indonesia as a Dutch colony. At the time, it was Dutch East Indies to the motherland, the Netherlands, the Europe. So, yeah, it's a film I made during 2019 until 2020, around 26 minutes.
Yeah, there are a lot of these telegraphy stations around in the world, and it's also, in this sense, a very universal story maybe, or a global story, global and local story about a clash between this very controlling technique that the colonial power set up and forms of resistance or answering in the present time. You will also attend the HKW in Berlin, the HKW event in Berlin that we're going to have this October, where we will talk more about these colonial radio and telegraphy stations. So now, Ria, tell me again, how long is your film so that the viewers have a little bit an expectation?
It's 26 minutes, 26. And there's a lot of subtitles, so I guess maybe it's a bit too far for people to, if you can like come closer, I guess, to the screen, that would be great. Yes, we can have a dark space, so it's amazing.
Yes, so dark space in 26 minutes, and after this we will have a break of half an hour and the blind walk opportunity with Nathalie waiting for you outside. Have a good screening.
Thank you.
asing. 28 tahun setelah letusan Gunung Krakatau, pemerintah kolonial sibuk mencari jalan menghubungkan dua tempat yang secara geografis terpisah jauh. Letusan Krakatau menjadi peristiwa yang penting. Letusan Krakatau adalah bencana alam pertama di dunia yang diwartakan secara langsung dalam skala global. Di kala itu, teknologi telegraf cepat mewartakan keadaan pasca erupsi Krakatau ke benua Eropa. Karet yang digunakan dalam kabel telegraf hanya bisa didapat dari getah perca endemik di kepulauan sekitar Krakatau. Alam yang bersifat rekursif menjadi musuh utama bagi pemerintah kolonial. Pasca peristiwa ini, pemerintah kolonial mulai bertanya, teknologi apa yang bisa lebih langsung mewartakan peristiwa dan kejadian penting di Hindia Belanda? Setelah menghabiskan bertahun-tahun eksperimen, akhirnya pemerintah kolonial menemukan jalan keluarnya. Ditemukannya dua gunung, Puntang dan Haruman sebagai entitas penyokong antena yang masif. Dua gunung ini dimengerti sebagai antena raksasa yang dapat menghubungkan Hindia Belanda dan Kerajaan Belanda lewat kumparan energi yang dikirimkan tanpa perangkat kabel. Gunung sebagai teknologi radiotelegrafi. Akhirnya pada tahun 1923, stasiun radio telegrafi pertama di Tenggara Asia ini berdiri. Stasiun radio yang menggunakan arc transmitter paling kuat dengan kawat antena sepanjang 2 km membentang antara dua gunung, Puntang dan Haruman. Stasiun radio ini dinamakan Radio Malabar. Secara spekulatif, pemerintah kolonial Belanda mungkin membuat Radio Malabar sebagai aksi politis dalam menyikapi teknologi komunikasi. Pemerintah kolonial disinyalir menghindari usaha penyadapan jika jaringan telegraf kabel transatlantik dalam laut dimonopoli oleh Kerajaan Inggris lewat proyek mereka All Red Line. Nirkabel adalah bentuk praktis kolonial Belanda dalam menyiasati kekuatan Kerajaan Inggris. Radio Malabar dibangun oleh akumulasi keringat warga adat lokal. Energi fisik mereka ditransformasi menjadi energi kasat mata yang kemudian disalurkan lewat transmisi radio. Gelombang radio tidak berwarna, tidak berbau, dan tidak terlihat. Bagaimana warga adat lokal bisa menghitung efek dari gelombang radio pada tubuh mereka dan tubuh-tubuh alam di sekitar mereka? Radio Malabar dibangun setelah pembakaran hutan secara masif di daerah Pegunungan Malabar. Para arwah leluhur yang berabad-abad tinggal di gunung beralienasi.
Magandang hapon ulit sa ating lahat, and welcome back to the last segment of the Echoes of Listening to the World. Again, I'm meLê, yamomo. We've already spent about 4 hours going through different ways and modes of listening and perhaps technologies of listening. We've listened to the archives, we've listened to music, and we've also listened to different ways through which radio has become a technology that has shaped our ears, and perhaps how it has negotiated different cultures around the world. Now that we are at the very end of this program, I'd like to invite everyone as well, not just to new ways of listening to music and sound, but I want to mention a particular reason that me as a curator has invited a special group of sound artists, music practitioners, sound practitioners. Every time I am involved in sound festival, music festivals, I am always struck by how not just how male a lot of sound festivals are. Even electronic music is always very puro mga lalaki. And we're always asking, but where are the women? And where are the queer voices? I am cis male, but I always also feel that electronic music is intertwined with the queer history. And I always wonder, where are the queer sounds? Where are the queer voices in sound and music festivals? And so one way that that I have also really reflected and thought about in this Listening to the World workshop is to really think about female voices, women voices, and put that in the foreground, because we could not talk about that and say at some point we will include that. There are women sound artists, there are queer sound artists, and they are here today. And they come really also from very specific contexts that most of the time I always find that how do we perform, that sometimes we also perform very much to particular ears, and sometimes we perform for the European ears, white ears, male ears, but right now I'd like to invite you to a particular way of listening as well. And I also want to mention particularly Rani, whom I've been really following Rani's work. Rani comes from Minangkabau, who has also a particular way of the society is organized in a very matrilineal society where the Bundok Kanduang, the mother figure is at the center. That it is the Bundok Kanduang, the mother, who has the voice and the final say about how society operates. So if we keep talking about how can we get out of patriarchy, here it is. There are sound artists engaging this at the center of their very, very practice. So I also say this also as a curator. Come on, curator, we can do better. And so, as bilang lalaki, I think I shouldn't speak too much, and that I end up mansplaining everything. But all I want to say now is that I'd like to invite you. Many of these artists, many of our ladies today, some of them have met before in other workshops. Some met for the first time in Sagada, and we've given this provisional name for them and call them Sagada Flowers. And to listen to how their voices were entangled, their practice are entangled, their music are intertwined into, for me, a new sonic utopia. And we will have, the first 20 minutes will be a performance with the Sagada Flowers. After this, we'll invite you to jam with them. And then at the end, we will close the program with no more jam. So there will be no more jam. We'll just butter it up. And we'll have, and at the very end, we invite everybody also to have a closure through a sound massage to be given to us by Angeline de Dios. So Angeline will explain a little bit this offering that she will give us, and you could find spaces around the room to lie down or sit down as a way to close our listening to the world echo today. Please put your hands together for the Sagada Flowers.
Thank you, Sagada Flowers. Ooh. We're in outer space. I'd like to offer the last few moments together in an act of public solitude. So often we are told to rest, and we know that we ought to rest, but it's the hardest thing in the world to do so when everything around you and everything inside you calls for you to be in motion, in movement, in action, in response, in attention. It's hardest to rest when you are by yourself. So in this offering, we will rest together and alone. If you feel like closing your eyes, that's fine. If you feel like pulling out something to write on, that's fine too. I offer this in friendship with the beautiful and inspiring people of the Listening to the World workshop, to this new community here that is connected to us. We may have only met today, but you've stayed for the last 5 hours. You've created this space of community through your listening and through your presence. And my intention is to resonate that.